Parents gave my college fund to my brother's business. It failed in 6 months. I joined the military, got free education. Now I make six figures. Brother still asks for loans. Parents still wonder why I say no. Hey Reddit, my parents took my college fund and handed it to my golden child brother for his guaranteed business venture. 6 months later, dead in the water. So I joined the military, got my education for free, and built a six-figure career while they're still broke and bitter. Now they can't figure out why I won't bankroll round two of their terrible decisions. Buckle up. I'm Jake, 29 male, and I've got a brother named Brandon, 32 male, who's been the family's chosen one since birth. You know the type. Could do no wrong, got praised for breathing, while I was basically the spare kid they kept around for manual labor and guilt trips. Growing up in suburban Ohio, our family looked normal from the outside. Dad worked middle management at a manufacturing plant. Mom did bookkeeping for local businesses. Solid middle-class setup with a decent house and two cars that actually ran. But inside that house? Different story entirely. Brandon was the star. Played baseball in high school. Not even that well. Maybe hit .240 on a good season. But you'd think he was heading to the majors based on how my parents acted. They drove 3 hours to watch him sit on the bench during away games. Meanwhile, I was making honor roll consistently, and my parents couldn't be bothered to show up for awards night because it conflicted with Brandon's practice schedule. When Brandon wanted to take guitar lessons, they bought him an $800 Gibson and paid for private instruction twice a week. When I asked for help buying textbooks for my AP classes, Dad handed me $20 and told me to make it work. The textbooks cost $120. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. Christmas morning looked like a sporting goods store, exploded on Brandon's side of the tree. New gloves, bats, cleats, training equipment. My pile? Usually some clothes and maybe a gift card to a bookstore. One year I got socks. Literal socks. Brandon got a complete home gym setup. My buddy Carlos lived next door and saw all this happen in real time. His parents were from Mexico and worked construction, but they treated their 3 kids equally. He'd come over and just shake his head, watching my parents fawn over Brandon's mediocrity while ignoring my actual accomplishments. Man, your family's messed up, Carlos said one day when we were 15. Brandon had just gotten grounded for wrecking Mom's car while texting and driving, and the punishment was losing video game privileges for 1 week. I'd been late to dinner because I was at the library studying for finals, and got grounded for 2 weeks. It's whatever, I said, already resigned to my role as the background character in the Brandon show. Nah, man, it's not whatever. This is not normal. Carlos was right, but what was I supposed to do about it? I was a kid living in their house, eating their food, following their rules. All I could do was keep my head down and plan my escape. High school was more of the same. I joined ROTC junior year because it looked good for college applications, and because the structure appealed to me. Plus, the discipline and physical training gave me somewhere to channel my frustration that wasn't punching walls. My ROTC instructor, Staff Sergeant Morrison, was this no-nonsense guy who'd done 20 years in the Army. He actually paid attention to what we did, noticed when we improved, called out effort and discipline. First adult outside of school teachers who treated me like I had potential. You thinking about service after graduation? He asked me one day, after I'd posted the fastest time on our obstacle course. Maybe, I said. Depends on college stuff. Military could pay for that college, you know. And you'd get real-world experience most kids your age never see. That conversation stuck with me. A way to get education, skills, and independence without relying on my parents? Sounded perfect, but I didn't have to make that decision yet. I was still hoping things would work out the traditional way. When I was 16, my grandpa on Mom's side passed away. He'd been this quiet, steady guy who worked for the railroad for 40 years and saved every penny he didn't absolutely need to spend. Never flashy, never talked about money, just lived his life and took care of business. At the funeral, Mom's sister pulled me aside and told me something that would become very important later. Grandpa had set up education funds for both me and Brandon, $35,000 each, specifically designated for college expenses. He'd been very clear in his will that the money was only for education, nothing else. Your grandpa wanted to make sure you boys had opportunities he never got, my aunt said. He worked hard his whole life and never went to college. This was important to him. 35 grand. That was almost a full ride at a state school if I worked part-time and lived frugally. I felt this massive weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I had a path forward that didn't involve crushing student debt. Brandon didn't care much about the news. He was already enrolled at the local community college taking general ed classes with no real plan beyond figuring it out. His exact words when asked about his major were, "I'll know it when I see it." I, meanwhile, was busting my rear end junior and senior year to get my grades up, score well on the SAT, and apply to schools with strong engineering programs. I wanted to study mechanical engineering, had done all the research, knew exactly which schools had the best programs I could afford. Carlos and I would spend hours in my room planning our futures. He was going into his family's construction business, but taking business management classes to help grow it. We'd talk about starting our own firm someday, combining his hands-on construction knowledge with my engineering background. "We'll build houses that actually make sense," he'd say. "Not like these garbage McMansions everyone throws up. And they won't fall apart in 5 years," I'd add. Those conversations kept me sane, while watching Brandon coast through life on easy mode. Senior year, I got accepted to Ohio State's engineering program. Not my first choice, but solid school, close enough that I could stay in-state for tuition purposes, and my $35,000 fund would cover most of it if I worked summers and kept my living expenses low. I was ready, had my acceptance letter, had started looking at housing options near campus, was planning my schedule. Finally going to get out of my parents' house and start building my own life. That's when Brandon announced his business opportunity. So Brandon had been doing community college for 3 years at this point. Should have been done in 2, but he kept changing majors and failing classes. Finally landed on business management, which seemed to mean sitting in coffee shops with a laptop doing absolutely nothing productive. One Sunday dinner, he announced he was dropping out to start his own business. Mom and Dad looked at each other with these excited expressions, like he'd just announced he was running for president. "What kind of business?" Dad asked, already sold on whatever came next. "Sports memorabilia," Brandon said. "There's this huge market for vintage baseball cards and jerseys. I've got connections with suppliers, and I found this perfect retail space downtown. All I need is initial capital to get inventory and cover the first few months of rent." The retail space was this rundown storefront in a dying strip mall. The connections with suppliers were some guys he met on Facebook Marketplace. The huge market was him watching a few episodes of Pawn Stars and deciding he was an expert. But my parents ate it up like he'd just pitched them the next Amazon. "How much capital do we need?" Mom asked. Not, "What's your business plan?" or "Have you done market research?" Just straight to throwing money at it. "About 70 grand to start," Brandon said. 30 for initial inventory, 20 for rent and utilities for the first 6 months, and 20 for equipment, displays, and working capital. 70,000. I felt my stomach drop because I knew what was coming. "We don't have that kind of cash liquid," Dad said, and I relaxed for exactly 3 seconds before he continued. "But we do have the education funds. If we combine both, that's exactly 70,000. The room went silent. I looked up from my plate and saw all 3 of them looking at me. "No," I said. "That's my college fund. Grandpa left it specifically for education." "Brandon's business is an education," Mom said. "Real-world experience is worth more than some classroom theory. I'm enrolled at Ohio State. I start in 3 months. I need that money." Dad used his serious voice, the one that meant the discussion was over. "Brandon's opportunity is time-sensitive. The retail space won't wait. You can take a gap year and reapply next year, or look into student loans like everyone else. Everyone else doesn't have parents who steal their inheritance." Wrong thing to say. Dad's face went red and he started with the lecture about respect and gratitude. How they'd raised me, put a roof over my head, fed me for 18 years. How I should be happy to help my brother succeed instead of being selfish. "This is a family investment," Mom added. "When Brandon's business takes off, everyone benefits. You'll get your college money back plus extra." I looked at Brandon. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just sat there letting them do his dirty work. "This is messed up," I said, standing up from the table. "Grandpa left that money for college, for me, not for Brandon's fantasy baseball card store." "Sit down," Dad commanded. "We're not finished." "Yeah, we are." I went to my room and called Carlos. He came over and we sat in his truck in my driveway while I explained what just happened. "They can't do that," Carlos said. "It's your money. Technically, it's in a trust with them as executors until I'm 21. They can access it for educational purposes, which apparently now includes Brandon's business education. That's garbage, man." "Yeah." We sat there for a while. Finally, Carlos asked what I was going to do. "I don't know yet, but I'm not staying here to watch them burn my future for his stupid dream." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my college plans disintegrate in real time. My parents transferred the entire $70,000 to Brandon's business account, Miller's Sports Treasures LLC. The name alone should have been a red flag. Brandon signed a lease on the strip mall space, bought shelving and display cases, and started accumulating inventory from his connections. The inventory was a joke. Boxes and boxes of common baseball cards worth maybe 50 cents each. Some signed jerseys of players nobody remembered. A few vintage items that might have been worth something if they weren't in terrible condition. Carlos and I went by the store one Saturday while Brandon was setting up. The space was bigger than needed, the lighting was terrible, and the location was next to a vape shop and a tax preparation office. Not exactly high-foot traffic territory. "This is going to fail," Carlos said quietly as we pretended to browse. Yep, Brandon was excited though, practically bouncing around showing us his inventory. "See this Willie Mays rookie card? Could be worth $2,000 if I get it authenticated. And check out this signed Pete Rose jersey. Pete Rose is banned from baseball," I pointed out. "Makes it more valuable. Controversial stuff sells." He had no idea what he was doing. Zero business plan, no market research, no understanding of his customer base. Just vibes and optimism. Meanwhile, I was making my own plans. Staff Sergeant Morrison had given me information about the military route months ago, and I'd filed it away as backup. Now it was my primary option. I went to the recruiting office and talked to an Army recruiter about my options. "With your ROTC background and test scores, you could go active duty and qualify for full education benefits," the recruiter explained. 4-year commitment, and you'd have the GI Bill covering your entire degree plus housing stipend when you get out. 4 years seemed like forever when I was 18, but it was starting to look a lot better than watching my parents fund my brother's delusions while I took on crushing debt. "What about officer candidate school?" I asked. "That's an option too. You'd need to do your enlisted time first, or get your degree first, and go in as an officer. Up to you how you want to structure it." I took home a stack of brochures and information packets. That night, I sat down with a calculator and mapped out the scenarios. Traditional college route with student loans. 4 years of school, probably $60,000 plus in debt, entry-level engineering job starting around $55,000. Spend a decade paying off loans while watching Brandon waste my inheritance. Military route, 4 years active duty, use the time to mature and save money. Full education benefits after. No debt, real-world leadership experience that employers actually valued. Plus, I'd have job skills and discipline most college grads lacked. The math wasn't even close. I told my parents I was enlisting instead of going to college. They looked relieved. One less thing to feel guilty about, probably. Brandon barely reacted, too focused on his store's grand opening. "That's actually smart," Dad said. "Military will straighten you out, teach you some responsibility." I bit my tongue. The irony of him talking about responsibility while funding Brandon's retail fantasy was rich. Carlos was supportive but worried. "You sure about this, man?" 4 years is a long time. 4 years goes by anyway," I said. "Might as well spend it building something instead of watching them waste Grandpa's money." My last 2 months at home were tense. Brandon's store opened with a pathetic grand opening that attracted maybe 15 people, most of them friends and family obligated to show up. The first month of sales were abysmal, maybe $1,200 total revenue against $3,500 in fixed costs. But my parents kept insisting it just needed time to find its audience. Classic sunk cost fallacy in action. I shipped out to basic training in July, 2 months after Brandon opened his store. By the time I finished basic and got to my first duty station, Miller's Sports Treasures was already circling the drain. Basic training was exactly what I needed. 10 weeks of structure, discipline, and clear expectations. When you did something right, you got acknowledged. When you screwed up, you got corrected and moved on. No favoritism, no golden children, just performance. I excelled at basic. Top of my class in physical fitness, near the top in marksmanship. Earned expert on my rifle qualification. Carlos sent me letters every week with updates and increasingly bad news about Brandon's store. Nobody was shopping there. The business model was fundamentally broken. Sports memorabilia had moved online. Running a retail storefront for it was like opening a Blockbuster in 2023. After basic, I got sent to advanced individual training for heavy equipment operation and construction management. The mechanical engineering knowledge I'd taught myself in high school transferred perfectly. One instructor pulled me aside after a particularly good performance. "You've got a knack for this. Army will pay for your degree, then you could come back as an officer. We always need good officers who understand construction." That conversation planted seeds. I'd initially viewed the military as a means to an end, but I was starting to see a real career path. Meanwhile, Brandon's store was in its death throes. 6 months after the grand opening, Miller's Sports Treasures closed permanently. Total losses. Approximately $68,000 of the original $70,000 investment, plus another $12,000 my parents had kicked in trying to keep it alive during its final months. 80 grand. Gone. In half a year. Carlos sent me the full breakdown in a letter. Brandon had made critical mistakes from day one. Wrong location, wrong inventory, wrong pricing strategy, no online presence, and zero understanding of his market. He'd bought inventory at retail prices thinking he could mark it up, not understanding that serious collectors buy direct from shows or established dealers. The few customers who did come in were mostly browsing or trying to trade in their own collections for cash. Brandon didn't have cash to buy inventory, and when he did try to buy pieces, he'd overpay for junk. By month 4, he'd stopped paying rent on time. The landlord filed eviction papers by month 5. Brandon tried a going-out-of-business sale that attracted bargain hunters who wanted everything at 80% off. He closed owing money to vendors, his landlord, and my parents. The remaining inventory, thousands of worthless common cards, ended up in our parents' garage where they'd sit for years, a monument to wasted potential and poor decisions. My parents were devastated, not just about the money, though losing $80,000 would hurt anyone, but the crushing realization that their golden child had failed spectacularly at the one thing they'd sacrificed everything to support. Did they apologize to me? Take responsibility? Acknowledge they'd stolen my future to fund this disaster? Of course not. When I came home on leave after my training, the first thing Dad said was, "Well, the military seems to be working out for you. See? Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason." Like their terrible decision was somehow part of a divine plan that coincidentally worked out better than if they'd just let me go to college like I'd planned. Brandon was back living at home, supposedly regrouping and exploring new opportunities. In reality, he was sleeping until noon and half-heartedly applying to entry-level jobs he was overqualified for in his mind, but underqualified for in reality. The tension in that house was unreal. My parents were stressed about money, Brandon was depressed about his failure, and I was just there on leave trying not to start fights. One night, Brandon tried to talk to me about it. We were both in the kitchen late, him making a sandwich, me getting water before bed. "I know you're mad about the money," he started. "Yeah. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I really thought it would work. You thought wrong. That's it? That's all you've got?" I turned to face him. "What do you want me to say? That it's okay they gave away my college fund for your fantasy? That I'm not bothered watching you fail at something I told you wouldn't work? That I'm happy being in the Army instead of Ohio State because you needed to learn a very expensive lesson about reality?" He looked defensive. "Nobody forced you to join the military. That was your choice. My choice after you took my other options off the table. You could have taken loans like everyone else. Why should I take on debt because you wanted to play businessman with my inheritance?" He didn't have an answer for that. Just grabbed his sandwich and left. That conversation made it clear. Brandon didn't see himself as having done anything wrong. The business failed because of bad luck or market conditions or anything, except his incompetence and lack of preparation. And my sacrifice was just me being dramatic about something I would have survived anyway. My parents had the same attitude. They were sorry the business failed, sorry they'd lost money, sorry Brandon was struggling, but sorry they'd taken my college fund never came up. I went back to my duty station at Fort Leonard Wood and threw myself into work. I was done expecting anything from them. My first deployment came 18 months into my service, 6 months in Afghanistan, working construction operations. We built schools, medical facilities, and roads. Hard work in a hostile environment, but meaningful. Every structure we built helped local communities function. One project was a school for kids who'd been learning in a damaged building with no roof. Seeing those kids walk into their new facility, I understood why people stayed in for 20 years. Got promoted to specialist ahead of schedule. Earned my air assault badge. Leadership noticed I could handle responsibility. My platoon sergeant called me in after a successful project. "Miller, you ever thought about OCS? Army's got programs that'll send you to school while you're in. You finish your degree, come back as a lieutenant." That changed everything. I started researching green to gold. The Army would pay tuition, I'd keep getting paid, and commission as an officer afterward. Everything my parents had tried to prevent by taking my college fund, I was achieving anyway. Meanwhile, Brandon's situation continued deteriorating. Carlos kept me updated. Brandon had burned through a series of jobs, retail sales, customer service, insurance sales. Couldn't keep any of them more than a few months. Either got fired for poor performance or quit because he wasn't being utilized properly. My parents were supporting him financially. They'd taken out a home equity line of credit to cover some of their losses from the business and were now using it to float Brandon while he found his footing. Classic sunk cost fallacy on steroids. They'd already lost $80,000 on his business dream. Now they were going into debt to keep him from having to face reality. At the same time, they'd send me occasional emails asking how things were going. Surface-level stuff, nothing meaningful. They'd mention how proud they were that I was making something of myself in the Army, like they had anything to do with it. Never an apology, though. Never acknowledgement of what they'd taken from me. 3 years into my service, I got accepted into a degree completion program. The Army sent me to Kansas State to finish my mechanical engineering degree while staying on active duty. It was everything I'd wanted at 18, just earned the hard way. I excelled because I actually wanted to be there. Every lecture, every problem set was something I'd chosen and earned. My GPA was 3.7. More importantly, I understood the practical applications. When professors discussed structural loads, I could relate it to real projects. I graduated in December, commissioned as a second lieutenant in January, got assigned to Fort Bragg as a platoon leader in an engineer battalion. Now I was leading 40 soldiers, responsible for planning, budgeting, and coordinating complex projects. My starting salary, $58,000 base pay plus housing allowance and benefits. Not six figures yet, but heading there. Meanwhile, Brandon had moved back home permanently after losing another job. 26 years old, living in his childhood bedroom, working part-time at a sporting goods store. That's when Brandon started asking me for money. The first loan request came via text about 4 months after I commissioned. Hey man, in a tough spot. Could you spot me $500 until I get back on my feet? I'll pay you back next month. $500. Not a huge amount, but significant enough that I knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about $500. This was about establishing a pattern. I thought about it for about 30 seconds before replying, no. Not, sorry, I can't. Not, times are tight for me too. Just, no. He tried guilt. Seriously? I'm your brother. Me. You're the brother who wasted $70,000 that was supposed to be my college fund. Figure it out. Him. That again? I thought you were over that. Me. I'll never be over that. The answer is no. He didn't respond after that. But 2 weeks later, Mom called. Jake, your brother needs help. He's having trouble making rent and could really use some assistance from family. He lives with you. He doesn't pay rent. He needs to build some savings so he can move out. Just a small loan to help him get started. No. Jake, don't be petty. He's your brother. We help family. We help family? Where was that energy when you took my college fund? Long pause. Then, we've been over this. That was a business investment. This is different. Yeah, it is different. That was my money you stole. This is my money you're asking me to hand over voluntarily. Answer's still no. She tried a few more angles. Family obligation, Christian charity, being the bigger person. I shut them all down, and eventually she gave up. For about 3 weeks. Then, Brandon called me directly, trying a different approach. He'd been doing some self-reflection and realized he'd made mistakes with the business. He was learning from them and growing as a person, but growth requires resources. He'd found an opportunity to invest in a friend's online business, just needed $2,000 as his buy-in. Let me get this straight, I said. You want me to fund another business venture after the last one burned through 80 grand in 6 months? This is different. This is online. Way lower overhead. My friend knows what he's doing. Your friend is probably exactly as clueless as you were. Why are you being like this? I'm trying to rebuild my life. Rebuild it with your own money. I'm not your bank. You're making good money now. You could afford to help family. That phrase, afford to help family, like my financial situation obligated me to fund his continued incompetence. I can afford lots of things, I said. Doesn't mean I'm going to spend it on you. The answer is no. Don't ask again. I hung up and blocked his number for a week. The requests kept coming, though, just from different angles. My parents would casually mention Brandon was struggling during our occasional phone calls. My aunt would text asking if I could just talk to Brandon about something. Even my grandmother got involved, suggesting I should be gracious since I was doing so well. They were running a full-court press, trying every guilt angle they could find. And I shut down every single one. Because here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't refusing to help Brandon out of pure spite. I was refusing because helping him would enable the exact same patterns that got him into this mess. Brandon had never faced real consequences for anything in his life. Failed business? Parents bail him out. Lost jobs? Parents cover his living expenses. No savings? Parents provide housing and food. Why would he change when everyone kept cushioning his failures? My refusal wasn't about the money. It was about refusing to participate in their dysfunction any longer. I made captain at 27, 2 years ahead of normal timeline, thanks to strong performance evaluations and successful mission completion. My annual salary with allowances hit $82,000. I was commanding a company of 150 soldiers, managing multi-million-dollar equipment and complex construction projects. We built bridges, cleared obstacles, conducted route clearance operations. Real work with real impact. One project involved building a bridge to replace one destroyed by flooding. 3-week project, tight timeline, had to be done right because lives depended on it. We finished it 2 days early and under budget. The community threw us a small ceremony, thanking us for reconnecting their town. That kind of meaningful work is what kept me engaged. I could have gotten out after my initial commitment and taken a civilian job. Several classmates from Kansas State had gone into engineering firms and were making good money. But I was building things that mattered while leading people and getting paid well to do it. Meanwhile, Brandon had finally moved out of my parents' house into a basement apartment that my parents co-signed for and were helping pay rent on. He was working full-time at a warehouse now, which was progress, but still living beyond his means and still making terrible financial decisions. He'd bought a new car on credit despite having terrible credit history. The interest rate was probably criminal. He'd also gotten into sports betting, convinced he'd developed a system that would make him money. Spoiler alert, his system didn't work. He was probably down several $1,000s before he finally stopped, and that's being conservative. My parents were still supporting him financially, though they'd gotten better at hiding it. During one visit home, I noticed they'd downsized to a smaller house. They claimed they wanted something more manageable. Reality was they'd lost too much equity in the old place and needed to sell before the market tanked further. Dad retired at 63 instead of 65 like he'd planned, but his pension was smaller than expected because he'd borrowed against it during Brandon's business crisis. Mom was still working at 61, picking up extra bookkeeping clients to supplement their retirement income. They'd mortgaged their retirement to fund Brandon's failures, and he was still asking them for money. During one visit home, I brought my girlfriend Rebecca, a nurse at Fort Bragg. We went to dinner with my parents and Brandon. It was tense. Brandon showed up late and immediately started talking about a new business idea, a meal prep service for fitness enthusiasts. Only 15 grand to get started. And where's that coming from? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Talking to potential investors. Translation: asking my parents for more money. Before you talk to any investors, maybe learn from your last business. Do actual market research. Write a business plan. I know what I'm doing this time. You said that last time, right before you burned through $70,000. Mom jumped in. That's not fair. Brandon learned from that experience. Rebecca asked what happened with the first business. I gave her the real version, how my parents took my entire college fund for Brandon's store that failed in 6 months. Rebecca's expression went from confused to horrified. Your college fund? The silence was deafening. In the car, Rebecca said, your family is insane, and you're never giving them money. Never. Good, because I would have had serious concerns about your judgment. That's when I knew Rebecca was the one. I made major at 30, top 5% promotion rate. Salary jumped to $115,000 total compensation. 6 figures. I was commanding battalion-level projects with million-dollar budgets. The Army had sent me to advanced training. All of it paid for. Rebecca and I got engaged. Life was really good. Then Brandon's situation imploded. He'd gone ahead with the meal prep business using a predatory lender. 15 grand at 40% interest. The business lasted 3 months. Now he was being sued for $22,000, wages garnished, car repossessed, evicted. At 30, Brandon was moving back to my parents' house. They called asking for help. We need a family loan. $25,000 to settle the lawsuit. No. We'll pay you back. With interest. With what money? You're both retired and took a second mortgage for Brandon's first disaster. They tried every guilt angle. I shut them all down. Finally, I said what I'd been holding back. You took my college fund, gave it to Brandon for a business that obviously would fail. Never apologized. Never acknowledged what you did. Now you want 25 grand to bail him out again. After everything, you can't understand why my answer is no. That's the problem. You've never held Brandon accountable, so he's never learned accountability. And you've never acknowledged what you did to me. Silence. So that's it? You're turning your back on family? You turned your back on me when I was 18. I'm just returning the favor. I hung up. Rebecca and I got married 6 months later. Small ceremony at Fort Bragg's chapel. Mostly military friends and her family. Carlos flew in from Ohio and was my best man. None of my immediate family attended. They were invited. I'd sent invitations more out of obligation than expectation. They RSVP'd saying they couldn't make it due to financial constraints and prior commitments. Brandon specifically told my aunt he wasn't coming because Jake's been disrespectful to the family. I wasn't bothered. Rebecca's family more than made up for it. Her parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles. They welcomed me completely. Her dad pulled me aside during the reception and said, "You're a good man. Our family's lucky to have you." That's what family should feel like. Carlos gave a speech at the reception about our friendship spanning 15 years, through all the chaos and changes. He kept it light and funny, but ended with, "Jake's the most loyal person I know. Not blindly loyal, that's stupidity. But loyal to people who deserve it, and to principles that matter. If he's loyal to you, you're lucky. And if you lose that loyalty, you probably earned it." Everyone clapped. Rebecca squeezed my hand. I was exactly where I belonged. My career continued progressing. Made lieutenant colonel at 33, extremely rare, top 1% of officers. My salary hit $130,000 plus allowances. We bought a house off post. Started a family. Rebecca got pregnant with our first kid. I'd built everything I wanted. Good career, financial security, healthy marriage, promising future. All of it earned through my own work. None of it thanks to my parents. Meanwhile, Brandon's situation had stabilized at rock bottom. He'd filed bankruptcy, settled the lawsuit for pennies on the dollar, and found stable work as a warehouse supervisor, making about $42,000 annually. He was living with our parents and actually paying them modest rent this time. By all accounts, he'd finally accepted reality. No more business schemes, no more living beyond his means. Just grinding out a normal working-class existence like millions of other people. My parents' retirement was comfortable, but modest. They'd recovered somewhat from the financial hits, but would never have the retirement they'd planned. Dad worked part-time as a consultant. Mom had cut back her hours, but still did some bookkeeping. I didn't gloat about any of this. Didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. Then my phone rang 2 years ago. Mom calling, which was rare. We'd maintained minimal contact, superficial holiday texts, occasional updates about extended family, never anything substantive. "Jake, I need to tell you something. Your father had a stroke." That got my attention. "How bad?" "He's stable, but it's serious. Partial paralysis on his left side. He's going to need rehabilitation, probably home care for a while." "I'm sorry to hear that. We need to discuss care arrangements. The costs are going to be significant. Medicare covers some, but not all. We're looking at probably $60,000 a year for proper care." I could hear it coming. "We were hoping you might help with some of those costs, given your financial situation." There it was. After everything, they were asking me to fund their medical care. "No. Jake, this is your father. He raised you. Don't you think you owe him something?" "Actually, Mom, I don't. He raised me, sure. Minimal standard parenting. But when I needed him to prioritize my future, he chose Brandon. When I needed my college fund, he gave it to Brandon. When Brandon failed, he never apologized or acknowledged what he'd done. Now that he needs help, suddenly I owe him? That's not how this works. You're going to let your father suffer because you're still mad about college money? I'm not letting him do anything. I'm declining to fund care he should have been able to afford if he hadn't wasted his retirement savings on Brandon's failures. That's on him. And you. And Brandon. Brandon can't help. He's barely making enough to cover his own expenses." "Exactly. Because you raised him to fail and kept catching him every time. Now he's 32 and can't afford to help his own parents. Maybe you should have invested more in his actual development and less in his fantasy businesses." She tried several more angles, but I held firm. Eventually, she gave up, and we haven't spoken since. Brandon tried calling a few months later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got me. "What do you want?" I wanted to say, "I get it. Why you won't help. I finally understand." That surprised me. "Explain." The bankruptcy process. They made me do financial counseling. Sit down with someone and go through every decision I'd made. When I explained the sports store, showed them the numbers, the counselor looked at me like I was insane. Said it was one of the worst business plans he'd ever seen. That anyone with basic knowledge would have seen it was doomed. Yeah, and I realized, you told me. Carlos told me. Probably other people told me. But I didn't listen because I'd never had to face real consequences. Mom and Dad always caught me. Then when I failed, they helped me avoid the worst of it. So I never learned. And now? Now I'm 32, living with my parents, making 42 grand in a warehouse. I'm doing okay, but I should be way further along. And it's because nobody ever made me be better. They just made it easier to stay the same. Most self-aware thing I'd ever heard him say. What do you want from me, Brandon? Nothing. I'm not asking for money or help. I just wanted you to know I get it now. What they took from you. What I cost you. And I'm sorry. I sat with that for a minute. You know what the sad part is? That money didn't even matter in the end. I found another way. The military gave me everything college would have, plus more. I'm successful, happy, financially stable. The money wasn't the point. What was the point? The choice. Grandpa left that money to give me choices. They took my choices away to fund your bad decision. That's what I can't forgive. Not the money. The theft of my options. I understand. Do you need anything? I asked, surprising myself. No. I'm okay. I mean, I'm not great, but I'm okay. Learning to be okay with okay, you know? Yeah. Take care of yourself, Jake. You too. We hung up. I haven't talked to him since, but I think about that conversation sometimes. Maybe he finally grew up. Maybe it took hitting absolute rock bottom to learn what they should have taught him from the beginning. Either way, not my problem anymore. Last I heard through the family grapevine, Dad's recovering slowly from the stroke. Mom's working more to cover medical expenses. Brandon's still at the warehouse, still living at home, still single. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.